Good morning. This is Scott Stenson. Good to see you. I'm excited today for our video. Today we're going to be discussing righteous judgment, and I know this is a subject that can get feathers up in the air a little bit, ruffle feathers. Anyway, on this channel we look at scriptures and we look at prophetic teachings, and today is no different. And so let me start off with a story. I've attended many meetings at my church, of course, and occasionally the subject of judgment comes up, typically in the vein of, something like this: we shouldn't judge each other, we shouldn't make judgments, this kind of thing, because we're never good at it, which is absolutely true. We're often very bad at it. That's why a righteous judgment is so important, because if one learns to develop righteous judgment, then they are developing a gift, an attribute that God himself possesses. Judgment is one of his attributes. And we're aspiring to become like him. So the better judgment we can develop and the more righteous judgment we can develop, the more we're aspiring to be like him in our natures. Anyway, I was confronted outside of a few weeks later. I had made some comments about, how I had an Elder Oaks talk in mind, and I had made some comments, and the comments weren't well received just because they were unfamiliar to people. But again, Elder Oaks had taught the same, and it was also found in our True to the Faith manuals, which this used to be something that was given to our new members and things. Anyway, I was confronted outside the door of the sacrament room by a man who said, I don't judge at all. And I said, that's interesting. Are you sure you don't? And he said, yes, I follow the prophet, and I just do what the prophets ask. And I'm like, okay, let's go through this a bit. And in my mind afterwards, after we had this conversation, I thought to myself, so he's following the prophet, which is great. But I wanted to ask him afterwards, so how do you know this person's a true prophet? And I didn't ask him at the time, but had he said something like, well, I've felt the Holy Ghost teach me that he's a true prophet. And I might have asked him then, and how do you know that it was the Spirit of God that taught you that and not some other spirit? Ultimately, all things break down to, do we have judgment? Do we have proper judgment? In other words, you can't know a prophet's a true prophet unless you know how to judge among those who claim to be prophets, and exactly how to decipher a true prophet from a false prophet. And the Holy Ghost seemingly may have visited you, but as I've often taught in recent months and years, many people claim to have felt the Holy Ghost and felt the power of God in their lives, or just the power, some supernatural power in their lives. But the Spirit of God is often, or the spirit of there are counterfeit powers that are manifest in our lives. And so we need to be discerning and full of judgment in order to discern between the Spirit of God and when he's operating and the spirit of the devil or some other spirit is operating. It requires judgment and intelligence to properly understand both of these matters. And so it's nice that he wanted to follow the prophet, but even determining who the prophet is and which one should be followed requires a measure of understanding and judgment. And it's nice that he felt the Spirit in his life, but how does he know that it's the Spirit of God and not some other spirit? Because many have claimed, and I'll get into this in another video, many have claimed to have been led by God when they were actually being led by Satan. In fact, that's all too common, actually. So it's not quite as simple as it may seem. And so I'm going to touch on some things in this video that are maybe slightly uncomfortable to people, but they're very scripturally sound, and they're also according to the prophets. And you can either chew on them and ponder them, or reject them. It's, you're free to do whatever. But anyway, another thing, the reason this kind of was brought up to me, this subject has been so interesting to me over the last several years, is because I've asked myself, with the political environment being what it is, why are so many people making decisions in so many different directions? Even if people share a common, religious understanding, a lot of times there's still great variety in the choices that people make and how they perceive danger and how they perceive threat and how they and who they follow and who they endorse and who they place their weight behind. So there's a great variety of application, even though I'm speaking from a Latter-day Saint perspective, even though that we share, common understanding about Christ and his doctrine, there's a huge application of that in terms of political opportunities and political choices that we make. And so I've asked myself, why this great diversity when we share this common understanding at the most basic level of our lives? And this has been fascinating to me to kind of, so between those two things, between experiences like that one I had with that gentleman who, by the way, he's a good friend of mine. He just sees judgment differently than I do, and I have, there's no problem with that, of course. I just feel like he got me thinking again about why it is that I believe, and not just that I believe, but that it is a true principle of Latter-day Saint beliefs and doctrine that we are to develop righteous judgment. And these two stories and these two things, there are many others, have got me thinking about this issue. Okay, so enough of that said. Here's the question that I think is worth exploring today. I think we all agree and readily agree that we are to make judgments. And oftentimes it's said we're to only judge circumstances and never judge people. Okay, that's an interesting comment, but it's not exactly what's being taught by the brethren. I speak of Elder Oaks' talk, and I speak of some of the curriculum we have. So let me flesh this out a bit. Okay, so when possible, judging circumstances is preferred, right? But we make all kinds of judgments relative to people. So if I'm going to raise the question, are we to ever judge others? Answer, on occasion, yes, we are to judge others, but we're to do it in the spirit of righteousness, okay? Now, and we're to base our judgments on righteous principles. And I will try to lay this out today because this is a true principle. In fact, many people are deceived in the world because they don't apply this particular principle. And I'm not speaking alone of people's ideas. I'm speaking of people, because ideas and people kind of go together, okay? And you have to understand, if there's a wolf among the sheep, you have to understand the wolf, okay? The wolf is to be discerned. The wolf is to be understood if there's a wolf among the sheep. And you can't just say, oh, isn't everybody so wonderful? No, you need to form judgments, okay? In other words, this is the nature of a person who is, not led by the nose here and there and overcome ultimately by deception. One needs to be charitable, yes, but one needs to also be very, very aware of the teachers around him, the people who are saying this, here is salvation, over here is salvation. Now we have to understand things better than we have. And I'm afraid in our efforts to be, charitable, we've also we've become a little bit more gullible than we need to be. So we need to develop judgment along with the charity. Charity and judgment go together, okay? All right. Now, I'm even going to raise the question. So if this is controversial, this idea that are we to ever judge others is an interesting question. But are we ever to use externals in the forming of judgment? Are we ever to judge another based on appearance or based on externals? That's an interesting question. And I feel like we haven't thought through that enough necessarily in our lives. So I will lay out my case and from the scriptures and from the teachings of the prophets. You can make your own decisions about how you want to, of course, apply these things. But it is my thesis that we are to develop righteous judgment. This is scriptural. This is important that we do this because, as our own scriptures say, even the very elect can be deceived. In the last days, many signs and wonders would be manifest by the adversary and by his hosts. And even the very elect, according to the covenant, would, it says, be deceived, or if it were possible, they would be deceived. And so let's get into this here today, okay? All right. Now, to lay this out, we often go to the scriptures. We often go to the Sermon on the Mount, right, where this exhortation seemingly is here to judge not, right? Judge not that you be not judged. Now, I think it's well understood by most Latter-day Saints so in Matthew 7, we get this injunction, and on the occasion, Jesus is giving the Sermon on the Mount, and he's teaching, and the JST, though, the Joseph Smith translation of this Matthew 7 passage is fascinating. So let me go here first. So chapter 7 of Matthew begins. This is the JST of it. Now these are the words which Jesus taught his disciples that they should say unto the people. Okay, so these teachings are meant for not the disciples, but the people. So the disciples were to teach these things to the people according to the Joseph Smith translation. And what is it that people are supposed to understand according to this passage? Well, Jesus says, judge not unrighteously, that ye be not judged, but judge righteous judgment. For with what judgment ye shall judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye meet, it shall be measured to you again. That's the law of restoration. That makes perfect sense, right? The judgment we extend to others will be meted back to us or restored back to us. Verse 3, and again ye shall say unto them, why is it that thou beholdest the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Now, oftentimes we just quote that second verse and say, judge not that you be not judged, or we even sometimes quote the next verse, because with the judgment you judge, ye shall be judged. But then we don't read on sometimes, right? And the rest of the thought, the prophetic logic here is actually one that I wanted to get into. Verse 3 says, and again ye shall say unto them, disciples, you shall say this to the people, why is it that thou beholdest the mote that's in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam in thine own eye? So you're looking at, you're nitpicking on other people, but you're not understanding there's a beam in your own eye. And then finally, here's the end of the logic, at least as far as this passage goes. Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, let me pull out the mote of thine eye, and canst not behold a beam in thine own eye? Okay, now the third Nephi account, of course, bears that same reading out, all right? And so what is being taught here? Well, first of all, it's important that we understand that in the Nephi account, the third Nephi account, this same teaching isn't going to the disciples, the 12 disciples. It's actually intended for the multitude. And that's the same of the Joseph Smith translation. It's intended for the people. Okay, so it's not this priesthood, judgment is according to so we have judges in Israel that are meant to be judges in Israel. They're actually to be judges in Israel and make judgments relative to the standing of a person in terms of the church and activity and, priesthood blessings and so forth. But these passages are intended for the people and the multitude. And what the teaching says here is judge not unrighteous judgment, okay, but judge righteous judgment. So it has a positive declaration, but judge righteous judgment. And if we have a beam in our own eye, we can't see clearly to help the other extract the mote they possess in their own eye, okay? So righteous judgment, properly understood in terms of the Sermon on the Mount, is that ability to understand that we have a beam in our own eye, and that once that's removed and we can see clearly, we can begin to assist others who aren't seeing as clearly, okay? So the very nature of righteous judgment is, if I'm full of righteous judgment, I will be able to assist others to higher ground. If I don't have righteous judgment, then I am as blind as everybody else, and I don't necessarily have any capacity to serve and to assist and to elevate and help others to higher ground, because I myself am, struggling with, the beam, that which constitutes the beam that's in my own eye. So we're to purify our lives, we're to try to understand the Lord's mind and will, and we're to assist others, but not until we've extracted the beam from our own eye. But it does say, thou hypocrite, first cast the beam from thine own eye, and then, this is the commandment, shalt thou see clearly to cast the mote out of your brother's eye. We are our brother's keepers, but not until we extract the beam from our own eyes, okay? So, what is Jesus teaching here? He's teaching righteous judgment and how we need to, what the purposes of righteous judgment are, which is once we've, tried to align ourselves with God's will, then we are to assist others in that same process. Extracting the beam first, then we can see clearly to assist others and help them to higher ground. So this is in the spirit of charity, right? Righteous judgment is not doesn't counterpoint, it's not a counterpoint to charity. Literally, righteous judgment charity cannot be exercised properly unless one has righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is the prerequisite for properly administering charity and understanding or being able to administer charity in a way that truly elevates humanity. So again, this is not all that hard to understand, but righteous judgment is foundational to ministering to others properly and helping them to higher ground. Okay, there's that, and I could cite many scriptures along those lines, by the way. Judgment is much discussed. We're taught, this is what Elder Oak says in his talk. He said, he says he's a judge by his professional life. In his professional life, he was a judge. And so he studied judgment in the scriptures extensively and thought a lot about this subject. And he's asked himself the question, why do some scriptures seem to discourage judgment? Like we're not to judge. It's seemingly we're not to judge. And then others command us to judge. And then even sometimes there are certain passages in scripture that teach us how to judge. In other words, there's passages that seem to discourage judgment, encourage judgment, and or teach us how to judge. And all of this seems paradoxical and is paradoxical. And Elder Oaks, in this 1998 talk, I believe it's a 1998 talk, it's called Judge Not, Judge and Judging, given in 1998, March 1st, 1998. He said that basically this boils down to two principles. So all this paradoxical situation in the scriptures boils down to two principles. We're never to attempt to pass final judgments on another person's soul. I don't know anyone who's attempted that, but we're not to do that, and that would be, of course, useless because we're not able to do that in some ways. I mean, there's no situation under which, my rendering of a person's, my declaration of a person's soul has any weight in heaven at all anyway. But yes, for my own salvation or for my own well-being, I am never to pass final judgment upon anybody, like in terms of their eternal reward or something. But Elder Oaks said, though, but we make intermediate judgments every day of our lives, even though we try to, whenever possible, judge circumstances and not the person. Sometimes it involves the person as well. And this is what Elder Oaks has taught in his message. But I also want to read from True to the Faith, which is a manual published by the church and has influenced, by the way, this particular entry seems to be influenced by Elder Oaks' talk, and this is the same kind of content that's also found on Gospel Essays on the church website to this day. So listen to this language. This blows people out of this blows people's minds. when they consider that the church, we're not teaching this. I don't hear this taught ever, but I'm going to teach it in this video, and then I want you to kind of chew on it just in case you want to help others appreciate this. I think it's desperately needed, okay? Judging others is the section in the True to the Faith manual. Sometimes people feel that it is wrong to judge others in any way. While it is true that you should not condemn others or judge them unrighteously, you will need to make judgments of ideas, situations, and people throughout your life. The Lord has given many commandments that you cannot keep without making judgments. For example, he has said, beware of false prophets. Beware of false prophets. Ye shall know them by their fruits. So again, we've got tests given to us in scriptures of how to judge. One way to discern whether or not this person who's teaching this or that is a false prophet or a true prophet is to know them by their fruits. So the Lord is encouraging us to judge because he wants us not to be led astray. And one test for a true minister is he or she will produce proper fruits. You know, how many people have spoken ill of Joseph Smith over the years, right? His name would be had for good and ill among the nations. How many people have rejected Joseph Smith? And why? They haven't applied this test. They don't have righteous judgment enough to understand that the fruits that have come forth from Joseph Smith are good fruits. And so because this test, they haven't properly applied this test, at least seemingly, then they've reached different conclusions than others have. But anyway, his name, this is a perfect example. His name has been had for good and ill. Those who embrace Joseph's teachings understand that he's produced good fruit. And those who don't embrace his teachings have not yet understood that he was a producer of good fruit. So beware of false prophets. This requires righteous judgment. Okay, it says here further, you need to make judgments of people in many of your important decisions, such as choosing friends. How many teenagers could benefit from that wisdom, right? Choose your friends wisely. How can you possibly choose friends except you exercise righteous judgment, okay? Choose your friends wisely because who you company with is roughly who you become. That's an adage we talk about. Voting for government leaders. Again, I talked about there's a great variety of people who are applying, fundamental principles in different ways, but it requires great discerning judgment to know where to cast your vote, who to vote for, and at what time and why. And these things so being in a democracy requires righteous understanding and judgment to make proper choices about leadership and who to vote for and who to endorse and who to support. And choosing an eternal companion. There's a major decision. So it requires righteous judgment to determine, and you have to judge the person because you are judging among people as to who to marry. So all of these things require righteous judgments. And so yes, the emphasis isn't upon judging of people, but there are many situations in the course of our lives where we need to become both comfortable with judging ideas, situations, circumstances, and even people, okay? And this is according to the teachings of Elder Oaks, one of the apostles, as well as our curriculum, this True to the Faith manual, plus the topics essays, where this has all been kind of, now, but this is all scriptural. So in the end, aside from it being what Elder Oaks is teaching and what others are teaching, it's important to realize this is all very scriptural too, okay? This is all established in the scriptures. And in fact, it's an attribute of God, as I said. The idea of developing righteous judgment is an attribute of God, and it is something to be aspired to. Now, maybe today, because we're getting a little bit longer here on time, maybe today I could share with you one pattern that we've been given in Scripture, aside from that Matthew 7 reference to, you can know them by their fruits. That's the test that we've been given by the Lord. You're all aware, or most of you who've read the Book of Mormon, if you're a Latter-day Saint, have read the Book of Mormon and are aware that Moroni provides us a way to judge. And so he does caution us, saying, be careful not to call good evil and evil good, because in our day, evil and good would be kind of hard to discern. So we need to, he says, I'll give you the way to judge, and you might know as the light is light and the dark is dark, that you might know these things well. And he gives us a pattern whereby we can form judgments. Now, of course, in his case, he's ending the Book of Mormon, and the pattern he's giving us is so that people can properly understand and discern whether the Book of Mormon itself is of God or of the devil. That seems to be why he's providing that way to judge, that whole pattern for judgment in Moroni chapter 7. He's doing it, and this has been argued by Spencer and others, but I actually have understood this for many years before that, is that Moroni is giving us a way to judge because many would rashly judge and improperly judge the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, because it's a good thing, right? But Moroni says, how can you know what is good? How can you lay hold upon all good things? And all good things come from God. And how can you lay hold upon good things unless you understand the way that you might judge? And the way to judge is, if it speaks of Christ, if it speaks of him, if it inspires you to follow Christ and these types of things, it's of God. And if it doesn't, if it fights against God or in some sense pushes back against those things, it's not of God. So there's a whole pattern that's laid out in Moroni 7. Again, it's so that people can properly judge all things, but specifically, I believe Moroni wants to provide this pattern for the modern reader so that they can judge whether the Book of Mormon is of God or is of the devil. And he does say, woe unto you who judge rashly. Woe unto you who rush to judgment and call good evil and call this book evil anyway, there's a lot of scriptures about judgment, and that's just another example. Here's the third example, though. I was reading the Doctrine and Covenants yesterday, and I was reminded about this beautiful pattern we're given in section 52 of the Doctrine and Covenants, relative to how to judge. And judge what? Well, in this case, judge again true ministers from false ministers. Okay, so let me read the pattern to you, and then I'll just say a few more things towards the end, and then we'll call it good for this video. But I will make another video when we're going to go over a sermon given by Joseph Smith called Try the Spirits. It's about discerning spirits, and the sermon is just wonderful and powerful and so intelligent. Anyway, there's a whole sermon that I want to go over with Joseph Smith about discerning the things of God from the things that are counterfeit to his works. And so it requires discernment, judgment, proper understanding, intelligence to understand what's from God, what's of God, and what's not of God. All right, this pattern here in 52 starts this way, the Lord speaking. And again, I will give unto you a pattern in all things, that ye may not be deceived. For Satan is abroad in the land, and he goeth forth deceiving the nations. Wherefore he that prayeth, whose spirit is contrite, the same is accepted of me, if he obey mine ordinances. He that speaketh, whose spirit is contrite, whose language is meek and edifieth, the same is of God, if he obey mine ordinances. And again, he that trembleth under my power shall be made strong, and shall bring forth fruits of praise and wisdom. Notice, according to the revelations and truth which I have given you. And again, he that is overcome and bringeth not forth fruits, even according to this pattern, is not of me. Wherefore by this pattern ye shall know the spirits in all cases under the whole heavens. Okay, so what are we judging here? The spirits. That means men. That means people. The spirits of all men in all cases under the whole heavens. This is the pattern whereby you might know, he says, who is of God, who is sent of God, who is not sent of God. And in all cases, you can judge the spirits of men on this pattern. This is found in section 52 of the Doctrine and Covenants. This is just one of many places. I could point to several places where we're taught how to judge righteous judgment, and not just of circumstances, but in this case, the spirits of men, okay? So it's my thesis that we are to be full of charity and to become righteous judges. And on occasion, and more often than we may think, we will have to pass judgment, not final judgment, but what are called intermediate judgments, and judgments which will be important to not becoming deceived. In this world, we'll need to understand things well and be properly perceptive and discerning. Otherwise, we will be deceived and led away from the covenant path. Now, to conclude today, I'll just go over a few righteous principles. So if we're developing righteous judgment, if that's our goal, then Elder Oaks has given us some practical things to try to incorporate into our understandings. So we should always be careful and cautious about rendering judgment, okay? Careful and cautious. And also, we should always strive to be charitable as we form judgments, okay? Now, one true principle that helps us with proper and righteous judgment is we're not to be respecters of persons, meaning we're not to be partial, we're to be impartial. God is no respecter of persons, and he's the righteous judge, right? So we are to develop impartiality. We're to we're to understand this idea that we are to not be respecters of persons, meaning that we value all people against the same standard. We value all people. We judge all things by the same divine standard, and we don't show favoritism or partiality towards those who have particular characteristics, but all are accepted before God if they all are to be considered impartially, and we are to judge them when we have to make judgments. We're to use this standard, impartiality. Okay. Now, also in our judgments, we're not to be self-serving. We're not to be driven by negative emotions. He says, like if I'm full of anger, I can't really render righteous judgment because I'm being driven by jealousy or envy or anger. And these things, of course, will make my judgments unrighteous, no doubt, or skew them in a way that would be unhelpful. We also need to remember that we only form judgments when it pertains to our stewardship. That is, we need to understand that there's an order to things, and that we have stewardships, and righteous judgment would be rendered according to our stewardships. And I'm not just speaking here of priesthood offices, by the way. Okay. Also, we need to, before we render judgment, we need to make sure we have all of the facts, okay? That we've heard all of the parties speak, and that we've heard all of the facts. And then we can form better judgments, more righteous judgments. We rush to judgment sometimes without the information we need, and it turns out that had we understood more, we could have rendered a better judgment. So judgment requires getting all of the understanding we can and all of the facts we possibly can. Because it's true that to say we can be too harsh in our judgments, so we should be cautious and careful and charitable, because we can often be too quick to judge and too harsh in our judgments, okay? And whenever possible, we should judge circumstances instead of people. But often we will need to also render judgment relative to people, as I've mentioned and as has been taught by others, okay? Now, these are just a few of the principles that Elder Oaks goes over. There are many others in Scripture. Yeah, but it is true to say that God himself is a righteous judge. His priesthood servants are given the role of judges in Israel, and they are to develop righteous judgment. But remember, Jesus' words were also to the people and to the multitude, that they were to develop and render righteous judgment, that they might lift and help other people to higher ground. And without righteous judgment, We cannot know who should be our leader. We cannot know that we've actually experienced the Spirit of God, because it requires judgment and a discerning ability to know whether or not what we have received is of God or not of God. And all of these things are crucial. They're fundamental. So I would say righteous judgment is a most important attribute and gift of God. By the way, there's a great talk by Elder Bednar about the gift of discernment. And one of the beauties of the gift of discernment is we can discern error in ourselves through this gift, but we can also discern error in others and what they're teaching and what they're saying. So we can discern error in ourselves if we're honest with ourselves and can be self-examining, but also this will help us to not be led astray by those who would lead us astray. I suppose I'll leave it there. I have so much to say on this subject. It's a subject that I've given a lot of thought to. I hope that something that I've said in this video. Oh, let me just make a quick note on what I brought up a question about, should we ever make judgments based on the externals? And of course, ideally, we would never wholly rely on externals, because our senses can be so easily deceived. You know, our eyes can deceive us, our ears can deceive us. There's all kinds of things that we can be deceived by, because we're fallible, right? We're exceedingly fallible. This is why we need to be cautious and always pray for judgment, proper judgment, righteous judgment. But anyway, it's true to say, and I have many anecdotes from the prophets and others, it's true to say that externals, though they should never be relied on exclusively, can be helpful in forming proper judgments. Okay, so generally we don't rely on them heavily, but yes, externals can teach us. It's that principle that Jesus taught: out of the heart speaketh the mouth, right? So you can judge a person by their words. Why? Well, because their words suggest what's in their heart. Okay, so you can know from externals about the heart. Does that make sense? Jesus said, by their words will be the manifestation of their heart. So it's not what goeth into the man that defileth the man, but it's that which cometh out of the man that defileth the man. All right? So he was teaching this idea that, yes, you can judge a person if you need to, if it has to be done. In the spirit of charity, we do it. But if it has to be done, you can judge a person by their words, by their works, by their appearance. It's just not the most reliable thing to get at the heart, because ultimately we don't understand, unless we're inspired of God, as many have been over the years, to perceive what's in the heart of a person. And this is something that we do have experiences, or evidence of this in the scriptures. Amulek discerned the heart of Zeezrom, for instance. Alma and Amulek understood what the intents of the heart of Zeezrom were, because they were inspired servants of God. The thing is, what cometh out of the man defileth him, because it's suggestive of the heart of the man, okay? So yes, the externals are helpful, but they're not to be relied upon, certainly not exclusively, but they can indicate something of the man, okay? They can indicate something of, something that may be useful. Joseph Smith, I'll just give you this last thing here. Joseph Smith taught that in the very lines of a person's face can be read their thoughts. So the lines of the human face, he said, one can begin to discern their thoughts and what God they actually worship, which I find just to be a fascinating comment. But Brigham Young also said, let a man speak. Let a man speak for a few minutes in my office, and I'll already know something about the man I'm dealing with. Let a person speak for a while, just listen to them, and then it'll become clearer, more or less, who it is we're dealing with here, okay? The problem is we don't always listen to each other, and we don't allow for that. But Brigham Young and others, Joseph Smith, they did teach there are little notes in their writings and their teachings suggesting that the externals can be helpful. They're not to be relied upon exclusively, and we can often be misled by externals, but they are suggestive of of many things relative to the choices of a person, their history, and may even reflect something of their mind and their heart. And that is not often taught. Of course, that's not taught at all in church, but we do have plenty of evidence that that is also found in the teachings and in the experiences of those that Latter-day Saints consider to be some of their leaders. Anyway, I hope that was useful and interesting. I believe in charity. I believe in love. I also believe that in the last days, many people are being led astray. And in part, it's because it seems to me, because they have not developed this particular ability yet to be discerning and full of righteous judgment. By the way, the more of the Spirit of God you have in your heart, the more you will judge all things. The scriptures teach that. The more of the Spirit of God you have in your life, the more you will be disposed to judge all things and prove all things. And you'll want to hold fast to that which is good, because it's not all good. And we have to understand, what is what. Because good is being called evil and evil is being called good. But we need to search within ourselves for that light to guide us and to lead us to righteous judgment. Anyway, that's enough on the subject. Thank you for your time.